No one in Okoro village slept that night. In their homes, mothers held their children close and whispered prayers. Men sat by their doors with machetes across their laps, though they did not know what they were guarding against. Old women burned herbs and muttered incantations to protect their households from whatever darkness moved in the forest. Outside Chief Okonkwo's compound, his 4 guards sat around a dying fire, passing a bottle of palm wine between them. They drank quickly, desperately, trying to drown the fear that had settled in their bones. "How many has it been now?" one of them asked, his voice slurred. "How many people thrown into that place?" "6, Emeka said quietly, staring into the flames. "6 in the 20 years I have been alive, and not one body ever found." "My father told me stories," another guard said, his hands shaking as he raised the bottle to his lips. "He said the shrine was not built to honor the ancestors. It was built to hide something, to bury a crime so terrible that the earth itself refused to forget." The others turned to look at him. "What crime?" Emeka asked. The man shook his head. He would never say. He said some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. "But he told me this." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The spirits in that shrine do not kill immediately. They wait. They watch. They make you see things, hear things, and when your mind finally breaks," he snapped his fingers, "that is when they take you." A long silence followed. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, came a sound. Low, distant, like stone grinding against stone. All 4 men jumped to their feet, hands on their weapons. "What was that?" one of them hissed. No one answered, because they all knew. It was coming from the shrine. Years ago, before Emeka was born, there had been a man named Adanna. He was accused of stealing yams from Chief Okonkwo's father. Whether he did it or not, no one knew. But he was dragged to the shrine and thrown inside. That night, the entire village heard him screaming. Not just once, not just for a few minutes, for hours. He screamed until his voice broke. He screamed until words became nothing but raw, animal sounds of terror. He screamed until, at exactly 4 a.m., the screaming stopped. And then came the scratching. Long, slow scrapes against stone, like fingernails dragging across the shrine walls from the inside. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It went on until dawn, when the villagers finally gathered the courage to open the shrine doors. There was nothing inside. No body, no blood, no sign that Adanna had ever existed. Only deep claw marks on the stone walls. And in the center of the floor, carved into the ancient rock as if by something impossibly strong, were 3 words. He was innocent. The elders ordered the shrine sealed. But Chief Okonkwo's father refused. "The shrine is justice," he said. "It reveals truth. It punishes the guilty." And so it remained open, waiting. Inside the shrine now, Adanna lay on the cold stone floor, her hands still bound, her body motionless. The darkness around her was absolute, thick, alive. She could feel it pressing against her skin like water, like hands, like breath that did not belong to any living thing. The chains, those ancient, rusted chains that hung from the walls, began to move. Slowly at first, a soft clink, then another, then a long, grinding scrape as they dragged across stone, pulled by nothing visible, guided by something unseen. Adanna did not move. The temperature dropped. Her breath came out in white clouds. Frost began to form on the walls despite the heat of the season. Something whispered. Not words. Not yet. Just sounds. Hisses and sighs and low, guttural moans that seemed to come from the stones themselves. The darkness shifted. Shapes began to form, vague, human-like figures standing at the edges of her vision. Watching. Waiting. But Adanna did not scream. She closed her eyes and whispered something so soft it could barely be heard. "I know who you are." The shapes froze. The whisper stopped. And for the first time in 20 years, the shrine fell completely, utterly silent. Outside, the guards felt it, the sudden absence of sound, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath. "Why is it so quiet?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. Emeka stood slowly, staring toward the dark outline of the shrine in the distance. "I do not know," he said, "but I think something is wrong." "Wrong," another guard laughed nervously. "It has always been wrong. That place is cursed." "No," Emeka said, shaking his head slowly. "I mean wrong for them. The spirits. They always make noise. Always. Screams, whispers, scratching. But now," he trailed off, because now there was nothing. Just silence. Deep. Unnatural. Terrifying. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from something holding its breath before it strikes. 3 hours passed. Then 4. The night stretched on like a wound that refused to close. In his compound, Chief Okonkwo sat alone in his room, a clay pot of palm wine on the table in front of him. He drank straight from it, the liquid burning his throat, but it did nothing to calm the chaos in his mind. He kept seeing her face, that orphan girl, Adanna, the way she looked at him, the way she spoke. "I already belong to this land." What did that mean? He drank again, trying to drown the memory. But it stayed, vivid and sharp, like a thorn buried deep in his skull. And then the whisper started. At first, he thought it was the wind. Just the night breeze moving through the trees outside his window. But then he heard it clearly. His name. Okonkwo. Soft. Distant. Like someone calling to him from very far away. He stood up, knocking over the wine pot. It shattered on the floor, but he barely noticed. "Who is there?" he demanded, his voice loud but shaking. No response. He went to the window and looked out. The compound was empty. His guards were gone, drinking by their fire. The village was dark, but the whisper came again. "Okonkwo, do you remember?" His heart began to pound. "Remember what?" he said aloud, though he knew he was speaking to nothing. "What you buried." His blood turned to ice. No. That was 15 years ago. 15 years since the night he killed his brother in a fight over land. 15 years since he dragged the body into the forest and buried it beneath the stones of the old shrine. No one knew. No one saw. He made sure of it. "You are not real," he said, his voice cracking. "This is the wine. Just the wine." But the whisper came a third time, and now it was no longer distant. It was right behind him. "The shrine remembers." He spun around. Nothing. Just shadows. He stumbled backward, sweat pouring down his face, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Outside, the wind began to rise. Not a natural wind. This one howled like something alive, something furious, something that had been caged for too long. The trees bent and swayed. Leaves tore free and swirled through the air like 1,000 tiny knives. The guards of the fire stood up, looking around in confusion. "What is happening?" one of them shouted over the roar of the wind. Emeka did not answer. He was staring toward the shrine again. Because from deep within the forest, from the direction of that cursed place, came a sound. Low, rhythmic, steady, thump, 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 like a heartbeat, or like footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, coming closer. "Do you hear that?" Emeka whispered. The others nodded, their faces pale. Thump, thump, thump. It grew louder. The ground seemed to vibrate with each beat. "What is that?" one guard asked, his voice barely audible. "I do not know," Emeka said, "but it is coming from the shrine." They all turned to look. The forest was pitch black. Nothing moved, but the sound continued. Thump, thump, thump. Closer, closer. And then, Just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The wind died. The forest fell silent. And in that silence, somewhere far away, a rooster crowed. Kokoruku! Dawn was coming. The first light of morning broke over Okoro village like a blade cutting through darkness. By 6 a.m., the entire village had gathered at the edge of the forest. Men, women, children, elders, even those who were too sick to walk had been carried on their relatives' backs. They came to witness what always happened after a night at the shrine. Nothing. No body. No screams. No trace. Just empty stone and the terrible silence of the dead. Chief Okonkwo stood at the front of the crowd, his eyes red from lack of sleep and too much wine. His hands trembled slightly, but he kept them clasped behind his back where no one could see. "Open it," he commanded. Emeka and the other guards approached the shrine slowly, their feet dragging as if walking through mud. They reached the ancient doors and placed their hands on the cold stone. They looked back at the chief one last time. He nodded. They pushed. The doors groaned open, the sound echoing through the forest like the cry of something in pain. Darkness poured out. Thick, heavy, cold. The villagers held their breath. Emeka stepped back, his hand over his mouth. "What is it?" Someone in the crowd called out. "What do you see?" Before he could answer, movement came from inside the shrine. A figure. Small. Slow. Walking. The crowd gasped. Old Mama Kemi grabbed her grandson and pulled him close. "Impossible," she whispered. Out of the darkness, into the morning light, stepped Adanna. She was unharmed. Her wrapper was dirty and torn, yes. Her feet were bare and covered in dust. But there were no wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. She walked calmly, steadily, her head held high, her eyes clear and bright in the rising sun. The villagers stared in stunned silence. She survived," someone whispered. "No one survives," another said. "But she did." Chief Okonkwo's face drained of all color. He took a step backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "This is not possible," he said, though no one was listening to him. Adanna stopped a few feet from the crowd. She looked at them, all of them, and for a moment, something like pity crossed her face. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying across the silence. "They wanted me to give you a message." "Who?" Emeka asked, his voice shaking. "Who wanted you?" And that was when they heard it. Thump. From inside the shrine. Thump. Footsteps. Heavy. Dragging. Wrong. The crowd began to murmur. Some people started backing away. Thump. Closer now. Something was coming out behind her. Adanna did not turn around. She simply stepped aside, her eyes never leaving Chief Okonkwo's face. "You should run," she said softly. The chief shook his head, unable to speak, unable to move. And then, from the darkness of a shrine, something emerged. A figure. Tall. Skeletal. Wrapped in rotted cloth. Its skin, what remained of it, was gray and pulled tight over bones. Its eyes were hollow sockets that somehow still saw. Its mouth hung open in a silent scream that had lasted 15 years. And around its neck, still visible despite the decay, were the ceremonial markings of a chief. The old markings. The ones that had not been used since. Chief Okonkwo's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, his face twisted in horror. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Because he knew that face. Even rotted. Even destroyed by time and earth and death. He knew it. The crowd began to scream. "Brother," the thing said. Its voice was like wine through a broken flute. Hollow, cracked, barely human, but unmistakable. Old Mama Kemi's hands flew to her mouth. "Chief Emeka," she breathed. "The former chief. The one who disappeared 15 years ago." The one Chief Okonkwo said had run away in shame. The one Chief Okonkwo said had stolen from the village treasury and fled in the night. The one Chief Okonkwo had murdered. The skeletal figure took another step forward, its bones creaking with each movement. Scraps of ceremonial cloth still clung to its frame, the red and gold patterns that marked it as the rightful leader of Okoro village. Around its throat, barely visible beneath the decay, were the marks. Finger marks. Strangulation marks. "You buried me," the dead chief said, its empty eyes fixed on Okonkwo. "You buried me beneath the stones and told them I was weak. Told them I was a thief. Told them I ran." Chief Okonkwo scrambled backward on his hands and knees, shaking his head violently. "I did not. It was not. You do not understand." "I understand," the corpse said. "I understand that you wanted my position, my power, my respect. And so you took it. You took everything." Behind the skeletal figure, inside the shrine, movement stirred. More shapes. More figures. Adanna, the farmer accused of stealing yams, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Ngozi's mother, the woman who spoke against the chief, her skull cracked and hollow. The young man who loved the chief's daughter, his chest caved in where he had been beaten to death. All of them, every victim, every innocent soul thrown into the shrine to hide the chief's crimes. They stood in the doorway watching, waiting. Adanna turned to face the crowd, and when she spoke, her voice was not her own. It was layered, multiple voices speaking as one. The voices of the dead. They remembered, she said. Every lie, every murder, every innocent life taken to feed one man's greed. The shrine does not kill the guilty. It reveals them. It makes them face what they have buried. The villagers began to back away from Chief Okonkwo as if he carried a disease. "You told us the shrine was justice," Emeka said, his voice shaking with rage. "You told us it punished the wicked. But all this time, you were feeding it innocence to hide your own sins." "I did what was necessary," Chief Okonkwo screamed, rising to his feet. "I did what was needed to lead, to keep order." "You kept nothing," the dead chief said, moving closer. "You destroyed everything. And now," the corpse reached out one skeletal hand, "now you will face what you buried." The crowd surged forward, not to protect the chief, to surround him. Men who had been silent for years found their voices. Women who had been afraid found their courage. Even the orphans, those broken, beaten children, stepped forward, their eyes hard and unforgiving. "Murderer!" someone shouted. "Liar!" another called out. "Monster!" Chief Okonkwo looked around wildly, searching for escape, but there was none. The villagers closed in like a tide, and for the first time in 15 years, Chief Okonkwo knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be afraid, to be the one who could not run. Adanna watched in silence, the spirits still hovering behind her. Their work complete. They remembered, she said again, softer now. "And now, so will you." Chief Okonkwo fell to his knees, not from force, not from being pushed, but from the weight of 15 years, finally crushing him. The villagers surrounded him in a tight circle, their faces hard, their voices rising like a storm. But it was the dead chief's hollow gaze that broke him. "Say it," the corpse commanded, its voice echoing from somewhere beyond the grave. "Tell them what you did." Chief Okonkwo's voice cracked. He tried to stand, but his legs would not obey. "I did not mean." "Tell them." The roar came not from the corpse alone, but from all the spirits standing in the shrine's doorway. Their voices merged into one terrible sound that shook the ground and rattled the bones of every living person present. Chief Okonkwo covered his face with his hands and began to weep. "I killed him," he said, the words tearing out of him like flesh from a wound. "I killed my brother. My own blood. The crowd gasped. Old Mama Kemi clutched her chest. Emeka staggered backward as if struck. He was weak. Chief Okonkwo continued, his voice rising in desperation. He gave too much to the poor. He listened to the elders instead of making decisions. The village was falling apart under his leadership. I did what needed to be done. I did it for Okoro. You did it for yourself, the dead chief said coldly. Yes! Okonkwo screamed, his face twisted with anguish. Yes! I did it for myself. I was tired of being second, tired of watching him waste what our father built. So I waited until he was alone one night. I told him I wanted to talk. And when he turned his back, he mimed the motion, hands around a throat, squeezing. I strangled him. I strangled him until his eyes went empty and his body went limp. And then I dragged him into the forest and buried him beneath the shrine. I told everyone he had run away, that he was a coward, that he had stolen from the village treasury. The villagers began to murmur, their shock turning to rage. And the others? Emeka asked, his voice shaking. Obinna, Ngozi's mother, the young man who loved your daughter. What about them? Chief Okonkwo laughed, a broken, hollow sound. They knew, he said, or they suspected, or they asked too many questions. So I used the shrine. I turned it into a weapon. I convinced you all that it was justice, that it was the ancestors' will. But it was me, always me. Every person thrown into that darkness was thrown there because I needed them gone. He looked up at the crowd, tears streaming down his face. And the orphans! His voice dropped to a whisper. The orphans were the worst. Because when I looked at them, small, helpless, begging for scraps, I saw myself. I saw the boy I used to be before I took power, before I became feared. They reminded me that I was not born strong, that I built my throne on bones and lies. He covered his face again. So I beat them. I broke them. I made them suffer, so I would not have to remember what it felt like to be powerless. Silence fell over the crowd. Even the wind seemed to stop. Chief Okonkwo knelt there, exposed, destroyed, the man he had pretended to be finally stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. The dead chief stared down at him for a long moment. Then, slowly it began to turn away. Your confession is recorded, it said. The earth has heard. The ancestors have heard. And now, it looked back one last time. Now you will live with what you have done. The spirits began to retreat, one by one, back into the shrine. Their forms grew fainter, more transparent, until they were nothing but shadows and smoke. The skeletal figure of Chief Emeka was the last to go. It paused at the threshold and spoke once more. May you never find peace, it said. As we never did. Then it stepped into the darkness. The shrine doors closed. And for the first time in 20 years, the land seemed to exhale. The air grew lighter. The cold lifted. The oppressive weight that had hung over Okoro village for so long simply vanished. Adanna stood in the center of it all, her eyes returning to their natural color, her body swaying slightly as if waking from a deep sleep. She looked around at the villagers, at the broken chief still kneeling in the dirt, and she smiled. A small, sad, knowing smile. It is finished, she said softly, and then she collapsed. Chief Okonkwo was dragged away by the elders. Not gently, not with respect. They bound his hands with the same rope he had used to tie so many others. They marched him through the village as the sun climbed higher, and every person who saw him spat at his feet. He will be taken to the regional council, old Mama Kemi announced. Let the government decide his fate, but he will never lead again. Never. The crowd cheered. Emeka and 2 other men were chosen to guard him until the authorities arrived. As they led him away, Chief Okonkwo did not struggle, did not protest. He simply walked, his head down, his spirit broken. The shrine stood silent at the edge of the forest. The elders gathered stones and mortar and began to seal its doors permanently. No one will enter this place again, they said. It has served its purpose. Let the dead rest now. As they worked, villagers brought offerings, flowers, palm wine, cola nuts, and placed them at the base of the sealed entrance. For those who suffered, they whispered, "May you finally find peace." In the village square, the orphans gathered, all 12 of them, thin, scarred, still afraid to believe what had happened. Old Mama Kemi stood before them, tears in her eyes. "You are orphans no more," she said. "From this day forward, you are children of Okoro. This village failed you. We failed you, but we will fail you no longer." She gestured to the land that had once belonged to Chief Okonkwo, the fertile fields, the large compound, the storehouses full of grain. "This is yours now," she said. "All of it. The elders have decided. You will work the land together. You will share the harvest. And when you are old enough, you will choose your own leaders." The children stared in disbelief. Chitty, the boy with the broken hand, began to cry. Ngozi, the girl who had been chased into the forest, fell to her knees. And slowly, one by one, they began to smile. Real smiles. The kind that comes from hope, not fear. Adanna woke 3 days later in old Mama Kemi's home. She had been washed, fed, and given new clothes. When she opened her eyes, she found the entire village waiting outside to see her. "You saved us," they said. "You brought truth," others added. "You must lead us." But Adanna shook her head. "I am not a leader," she said softly. "I am just a girl who listened when the dead needed to speak. Your village does not need me. It needs to remember what it forgot, that the weak deserve protection, not punishment." She stood, weak but steady, and walked to the door. "Where will you go?" old Mama Kemi asked. Adanna looked toward the forest, toward the roads beyond the village, toward the world that stretched out like an endless promise. "Wherever I am needed next," she said. And before anyone could stop her, she was gone. Some say she went north, others say west. A few swear they saw her helping another village months later, standing up to another tyrant, speaking for another group of forgotten souls. But no one knows for certain, because Adanna belonged to no place. She belonged to the land itself, and the land had many voices still waiting to be heard. Years have passed since that night in Okoro village. The shrine still stands at the edge of the forest, its doors sealed with stone and mortar. Vines have grown over it. Moss covers the ancient symbols. Birds nest in the cracks. But no one fears it anymore, because the villagers learned something that night, something that changed them forever. Those who abuse the weak are often guarding secrets that cannot survive the light. Chief Okonkwo spent his power crushing orphans and throwing innocence into darkness, not because he was strong, but because he was afraid. Afraid that someone would see through his lies. Afraid that the truth he buried would claw its way back to the surface. And in the end it did, not through force, not through violence, but through a small girl who refused to kneel. Today, if you visit Okoro village, you will see something beautiful. Children run freely through the streets. The orphans, now grown, tend the most fertile fields in the region. They have built schools, dug wells, and opened their doors to any child who has nowhere else to go. Where fear once lived, laughter now echoes. Where cruelty once reigned, kindness has taken root. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible night, the villagers gather at dawn. They bring flowers to the sealed shrine. They speak the names of those who were lost. And they tell the story of the orphan who would not kneel, the story of the dead who remembered, the story of a village that learned too late what it means to protect the powerless. Old Mama Kemi, Now the eldest in the village always ends the telling the same way. She looks at the children gathered around her, their eyes wide, their hearts open, and she says, "The shrine was not evil. It was a mirror. And when we finally looked into it, we saw not monsters, but ourselves." She pauses, letting the words sink in. The shrine never opened again after that dawn, not because it was sealed, but because it had already spoken. And Okoro village, finally, blessedly, had learned to listen. The sun rises over the village. Birds sing in the trees. And somewhere, far away, a girl with ancient eyes walks a dusty road toward another village, another injustice, another voice waiting to be heard. Because the land remembers, and it always finds a way to speak. Here comes the end of the story. Before you go, if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Root and rise is where forgotten stories breathe again, where truth rises from the soil, and where African voices reclaim their power. If this tale stirred something in you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment. Your thoughts matter here. And most importantly, subscribe. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a movement. Root and rise, where the land remembers, and so do we.